Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to Avid Online. And for those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning and our partners for the evening. Avid Online was launched on the 1st of April 2020 as a direct response to the pandemic. Now we are 16 months young and over 265 programs later, we can say that although 2020 and most of 2021 has challenged us in unprecedented ways, we continue to champion and bring to our audiences the best of the arts and culture and stay true to our mantra that learning never stops. Literature has always been a robust and important part of our programming and curatorial philosophy. And over the years, we've collaborated with authors, academics, intellectuals, publishers, and literature festivals. Tonight's discussion is presented in collaboration with the Bangalore Literature Festival. We believe our partners share many sister concerns and passions for the future trajectory of literature in India and the world, and we are proud to present tonight's session with them. This brings me to our evening session, Darshana, Indian philosophy, ancient texts, and Western perspectives, a discussion around Indian philosophy and books like the Bhagavad Gita and the threads of these in Western philosophy and culture. This session is presented in conjunction with the recently launched book, Finding Meaning in Life with the Bhagavad Gita, co-authored by Vedanta teacher, scholar, and author Nima Majumdar. This book is a contemporary and a simple take on the Gita, and the lucidity of its writing beautifully highlights the depth of its profound philosophy. Nima will deliver opening remarks and will be then in conversation with our other two illustrious speakers from different parts of the world. An old friend and collaborator of Avid Learning, director of the Oxford Centre of Hindu Studies, Shonaka Rishidas, joining us from the UK. And we have writer and photographer Rameshwar Das, who is joining us from New York. A warm, global, virtual welcome to all of you. For more about our very impressive speakers, please refer to their bios that have been posted in the chat section. Today's session will dwell into Indian philosophical principles, ancient texts, and a Western perspective on Indian philosophy, religion, and thought. These speakers will also touch upon how ancient thought is applied and practiced today, and how it has evolved and played a role in shaping contemporary philosophical thinking at large. Please note the session will last 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, in which Nima will be taking questions. So please keep them posted. Keep posting them throughout the session in the Q&A box. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in such large numbers. Over to you, Nima. Look forward to your fascinating opening remarks and an enlightening session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asad. It's really a pleasure to be here and share a little insight on Indian philosophy today. So let me first a little bit start with my story. Everybody likes to hear this life story of people. And before I ask Shaunaka and Rameshwar, I'll just tell about me a little bit and introduce my book. I'm from Bombay, and I have both Eastern and Western exposure from the young age because my grandparents were Sanskrit scholars and they were translating Ramayana from Sanskrit to Gujarati when I was growing up. But my father was a product of modern education, so I had both with me when I was growing up. Coming from a family which valued education, I went to the US at a relatively young age to do my master's in international and public affairs at Columbia University in New York. And in fact, ironically, it is there that my, interest in Indian philosophy grew. By chance, if there is anything called chance, I met Swami Dayanand Saraswati, and I went for his talk just out of curiosity. And the title of his talk was, "Who are you and what's your relationship with the world and the cause of the universe. So the title really captured my attention because generally people don't talk about such big questions in life. So I went out of curiosity and two things that captured my attention. One is he said that I am not the creator of this knowledge. This is the spiritual heritage of India. It comes from Upanishads. It comes from Bhagavad Gita. I'm only a person. I'm a guru in this lineage of Guru Shishya Parampara, which is the knowledge is passed on from a teacher to a student in a traditional manner. That was attractive to me because I didn't have to follow anybody. I was only interested in knowledge and not in kind of, making somebody my guru and, giving up my own thinking capacity. The second thing that attracted me was anything that Upanishads were talking about, the way he was explaining it was backed by logic. And that really captured my attention because I didn't really feel as though I was made to believe in everything, but it just felt like I was exploring things. And that approach really attracted me. That initial curiosity actually, grew over a period of time. And I saw that how important this learning was to, find meaning and purpose in life and, live with a much wider perspective than generally we are used to. So I decided to leave my job at one point and study with him for 3.5 years. So I packed up and I stayed in a Gurukulam, traditional Gurukulam style for 3.5 years when I learned Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Sanskrit grammar, Vedic chanting, and her prayers. I studied original commentaries of Adi Shankaracharya on Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and after I finished my studies for 3.5 years, I decided to go back to work. So I went back to the UN where I used to work before I attended the 3.5 year course. And in fact, accidentally, again, it's there that my teaching of Vedanta started. Some of my colleagues were a little curious about what I had done in India. And so they asked me to just give a talk. And that one talk led to series of talks on Thursdays during lunchtime at the UN. Where my colleagues from all over the world came, participated. We had great question-answer sessions, and that was really stimulating. And over a period of time, these activities grew. So I started giving a talk at my home in Bangkok on weekends to a larger expatriate community. And then we started holding workshops and weekend programs along with my husband. And the activities grew so much that in 2013, finally, both I and my husband Surya decided to leave our jobs in Bangkok and move to India with this one grade of teaching Vedanta and Indian philosophy to people in Bombay. And we didn't quite know who would come to us. Luckily, we soon after arrival, we found a few people who were interested, so we started classes. And in that class, I really wanted to cover Bhagavad Gita because Bhagavad Gita is one of the most important texts in Indian philosophy. But as you all may know, the entire Bhagavad Gita, which consists of 18 chapters, has 700 verses. So it's a huge task, and I didn't know whether people would be willing to study for such a long time with me. So I decided to just take and select about 46 verses from different chapters of the Gita in a way that the entire vision of Gita was more or less covered. So I started teaching those 46 verses, and in one of the classes that I was teaching, after I finished the whole course, one of my students, Sayoni Zaveri, she decided to just compile the class notes and distribute among class people. So this is how this whole project started. And then Nandini Murali joined in, and we were just thinking that we would, compile class notes for distribution. But then came Rishad, our really good friend Rishad Sato, and he said, if you're putting in so much effort, why don't you publish a book? And that's where came this whole idea of publishing. What initially started out as a class note, into making it a formal book to be published. And our friend Navita Devi Dayal, who herself is a very well-known writer, she helped us, and finally we found, not with much effort actually, we found Alice Book Company decided to publish our work. So this is how our book has come. And let me now turn to the book and the content of it.
Gita, obviously, I think all of you may know, starts with Arjuna in despair. So he was breaking down because he had to fight a war with his own cousins, and on the other side were also his grandfather and his teacher, and he could not handle it. And in that despair, he still collects himself and asks his charioteer, Lord Krishna, the two questions. The first question was, what will give me final fulfillment in life? Because the way I study the situation, whether I win the war or I lose the war, I can't be happy. After if my winning costs so many lives, then I can't be happy. So that was his question, and that question was on final fulfillment. And the second question he asked was more situational. And the situational problem that he had is, what should I do now? I don't mind just retiring to Himalayas and going away. I'm not interested in this kingdom. Should I stay here and fight, or can I retire, which would be actually easier for me, retire and think about my spiritual progress. So under this context, Bhagavad Gita starts, and Lord Krishna teaches Arjuna, and there are two subject matters in Bhagavad Gita. The first is Brahma Vidya. And what is that Brahma Vidya? It's actually a bigger picture of life. And bigger picture of life has three pillars of inquiry. The first is, who are you? The second is, what is the nature of the universe? And the third is, what caused this universe? And what is the nature of this, the nature of cause of this universe, which in Sanskrit we call it Ishvara. Now, let me just give you a small glimpse of how that whole inquiry is done. So the inquiry starts with three pillars: you, the individual, the universe, the world, and the cause of the universe. But it ultimately collapses into one final reality, which is Brahman, which is limitless, infinite consciousness, and that existence which is not touched by anything. So let me just show you very quickly, how that is done. So first we look into the individual, and most of us think that we are as good as our body and as good as our mind. But Lord Krishna has something else to talk, to point out about our reality. He points out that the physical body undergoes constant change. Even your mind and all the different thoughts undergo constant change. So who are you? Are you that changing reality that we generally think we are, or we are something more than that? So what Lord Krishna teaches is that all the changes that are taking place in your body, in your mind, and also in the external world, you are not any of those. You are the presence which doesn't come and go, and that presence which objectifies everything that is taking place in the world. And what is that presence which doesn't change, which doesn't undergo any modification? And that presence is consciousness, Chit. So that Chit is existence which doesn't come and go, which remains even after the body goes. That it's almost like a light which lights up everything, and that light is neither affected by what it lights up, nor it actually extinguishes. It is one light, which is the truth of not only one individual, but all the individuals. So that is what he talks about as your true nature, as Brahman, Chit Swarupa, and not this changing, insignificant individual. Then the inquiry turns into what is the nature of the world? And the world, as we see it with our senses, it seems like all tangible objects. One is different from the other, and that's the impression that we get. And what Lord Krishna shows is, even when you look at any given object in the world, just let's take something exalted like sun, right? Even that, ultimately, it reduces into atoms, hydrogen atoms, atoms into particles, particles into quarks, and the whole, the entire object is forms within forms within forms. And when you think about the final building block of any given object, you don't find any given object being the final building block. It collapses into just a concept. And that concept ultimately depends upon awareness, the same chit, which is the truth of the person, which is Chit Swarupa, and that is one reality. So the whole world also collapses into this awareness, consciousness, right? Then the third is Ishvara, the cause of the universe. According to the Vedic and tradition, which includes Bhagavad Gita, God or the Ishvara is not a person away from us. In fact, Ishvara is shown to be knowledge and power, which manifests all these tiniest objects, the intelligence which manifests these tiniest objects and organizes these particles into atoms, and atoms into different organs, and organs into different entities. And that intelligence is something which is pervading everything, and it pervades the entire universe. So Ishvara is Sarvagnaha, Sarvashaktiman, all knowledge and all power, which manifests is all these different forms through this organization. And that Ishvara is also ultimately revealed to be consciousness, Brahman. Why? Because no knowledge can exist without awareness. So this awareness is the final irreducible reality of everything. Oneself, I, Jagat, the entire universe, and the cause of the universe. So this is what we call the vision of oneness. So Lord Krishna's teaching is please don't think it's something small. It's not about advising you what to do, what not to do. He has a big vision to show us about the nature of reality. And he shows us that where we see many, actually there is only one reality. And a human being would only be fulfilled when one knows one's oneness with the whole universe and its cause. So that is answer to his first question. The second question, which is more situational, he has many different things to talk about in terms of personal growth, right? Which is called Yoga Shastra. What does Yoga Shastra do? Well, it allows us to prepare our mind for this ultimate vision of oneness. So what does it include? Well, it includes many different frameworks. One of them is very famous, Karma Yoga. The other is 20 values that he talks about in chapter 13 of the Gita. He talks about meditation. He talks about Raga Dvesha management. How do we make decisions? How do we develop resilience towards changing the world? So all that is with reference to human growth. And that human growth is critical for us to understand the final vision of oneness that Gita is talking about. So Gita has two subject matters, Brahma Vidya and Yoga Shastra. When we talked about Yoga Shastra, what we really tried to do is to burst some of the myths about Bhagavad Gita. I have heard as a teacher again and again that people think that Gita is talking about detachment with the world. So Gita is not talking about detachment with the world. In fact, Lord Krishna is talking about participating in the world with responsibility. In fact, Arjuna wanted to run away, and Lord Krishna says, hey, you have to stay here and face the situation rather than run away. Do the appropriate thing. Running away from a situation is a very easy thing to do. So this is why it's not about us moving away from the world or detaching from the world, but it's about standing up and doing what needs to be done. This is what Gita highlights. The second thing is that Lord Krishna, it seems as though Lord Krishna is asking us to give up our desires. Even that is not true. Lord Krishna is talking about, hey, desire is your privilege. Desire is Ichha Shakti. Through that, you express yourself. But only thing he asks us is what pursue your desires within the parameters of dharma. And that is what he is saying, and not to give up the desires. The third thing is, commonly it is said that give up the desire for results, give up the expectations for results. Even that is not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is that just a fact. It's not an advice that give up the expectations of result. He is showing you that you have a choice over actions, but never over the result of the action. So these are very important things for us to recognize, even about emotions, right? He's not talking about giving up negative emotions. He's talking about recognize your emotions and master your emotions to live an effective life. So this is where Bhagavad Gita is a blessing to humanity, according to me, because it shows us a very big vision of reality. And at the same time, it paves the way for our growth, where we can live a meaningful, cheerful life and enthusiastic life, and not just a disinterested life. So this is the book, and this is what we have tried to convey in the book. Now I turn to Shaunaka and Rameshwaram, and I'm very curious to know about their journey, and more importantly, also, where did they get their names from? Because just one little thing, a side note, that I'm teaching Mundaka Upanishad now, and there is Shaunaka Rishi there. So I'm very curious, Shaunaka, where did you get your name and how was your journey?
Thank you very much, Nima, and for that introduction. I come from an Irish Catholic background. That's how I was brought up. But at the age of 18, I entered an ashram in Dublin, in Ireland, a strange place, 1979, a strange place to encounter an ashram. But strangely, I suppose, I entered the ashram to become a Christian, because I found they were practicing the Christianity I was reading in the Bible. And maybe that was my mistake. I actually read the Bible. But I found that this group was practicing that idea of love of God, which I thought at the time was exclusively Christian. I didn't realize that this was something that, and in fact, in the Indian context, was older than Christianity. So I realized if I wanted to become a Christian, these are the people I can work with. A very individual journey. And as part of my progress in the ashram, I became initiated into certain practices, into a mantra, etc. And part of that was to accept a spiritual name, which was Shaunaka Rishi Das. So the Shaunaka Rishi you're reading about is, Das means servant of, as everyone knows. So it's not a family name that I am from a family of servants. I've whatever family I've come from, I am now a servant constitutionally. But I'm the servant of Shaunaka Rishi, who is a wonderful sage. He appears in the Vedas, he appears in the Puranas. He's all over the place, it seems. So yeah, so that's some basic background as to how I got the name. Rameshwar, how did you get your epithet?
I didn't come by it, honestly. I will say that. It's a Hindu name, of course. So, and we share our being in the servant class together. But my experience and the reason that I traveled to India when I was quite young came from the title of this panel, which was a darshan. I met someone when I was in university who had just come back from a time in an ashram in India, who's was a psychologist at Harvard, and he had experimented with psychedelic drugs and LSD in that period in the 60s, which is when I was in university. And he had finally kind of come to the end of that trail, and had made his way to India, traveled overland with a friend across Asia, and through one of those series of coincidental meetings, which none of us, I think, believe in coincidences anymore. But he met an old man with a blanket up in the Himalaya foothills, who's called Neem Karoli Baba, which was a name of a train station. And there's a story that goes with that, of course, this happens. But that meeting precipitated a great change in his being. He had been called Richard Alpert, and he was given the name Ram Das by Neem Karoli Baba. And then he spent half a year, a winter, in an ashram in the Himalayas, learning yoga and meditation. And when he came back to the States, he gave the first talk that he gave. I was at the university where I was attending, and it changed my view of life and myself and reality. And I think that is what darshan really is about. And that so I learned yoga and meditation from him, and then I tried to get to India, which was also one of those series of coincidental happenings. And I did get to see Neem Karoli Baba in 1970. And I was still Jim at that point, my birth name. And shortly before I left, he gave me the Rameshwar Das name. So we mostly called him Maharaji. He was a great Siddha. And it's that tradition of practitioners in India who bring this philosophy into reality that affected me so powerfully. So it was that period. I came to India on a 3-month tourist visa, and I stayed for a year and a half before I got thrown out. I got what's called a quit India notice. Which basically says, if you don't leave now, we're never letting you come back again.
You had to go.
So I had to go. And then before I managed to return to India, Neem Karoli Baba left his body. So that kind of changed my orientation substantially. But I continued to spend time with Ram Das, and I've, as you are aware, I have finished a memoir with him, and he died at the end of 2019, kind of just before the pandemic was setting in. And the memoir was published, and it's just been printed in India, which is very curious. He kind of brought back the wisdom of the Vedic teaching and yoga and meditation to the West, and that integration into the West was, such a revelation for so many people. And now yoga's on every street corner in America. I think that so curious that reflection is coming back to the younger generation in India now, who are really examining their own heritage, which is so profound. And you are a wonderful spokesman for that, Nima. And those traditions that were not so present in the West before that, and especially the great tradition of saints and gurus, I think, that who have really come to that realization and actualized it into life in ways that really are an incredible example of what humanity can be. So that aspect of darshan was what pulled me in.
Yes.
And I've been back and forth to India many times in the interval, and I am very concerned about what's happening with the pandemic there now. It's difficult to imagine the degree of suffering that is occurring as it is in the States too. And it's curious that my guru's primary teaching was sabek. It's all one, as you have, expressed from the Gita, which is that, incredible revelation of that view. And in this pandemic, as we can see from our little boxes on Zoom, we're all in it together.
Yes, absolutely. So that brings me to another next question, and that is, what specifically, to both of you, what specifically impacted you about this tradition? If you were to say which idea captured you, or what is it that fascinated you about it? Just can you give some example, concrete example?
Do you want to take the ball first, Shonika?
No, go ahead, Rameshwar. You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. it's things roll downhill. I think first of all, that tradition of realized beings, and I came to really appreciate that aspect of the Indian culture first through my own my guru, and we were able to meet with saints like Anandamayi Ma, who was an incredible manifestation of the maternal aspect of divinity. Just sitting with her, there was this incredible sort of thick peace around her, and beautiful being. Yes. And then my readings of Ramana Maharshi, who was that deep primal being of and experiencing that identity that he as a 17-year-old lying on the study of his uncle and taking himself through his own death.
Yes.
And finding that existence of Brahman or Atman in himself. And then, really just manifesting that through the rest of his life for other people. So I think that, those aspects, and I think in particular also the side of Hinduism that allows for so many different approaches to God, through Gyan and Bhakti and Karma Yoga. I think there are as many kinds of Hinduism as there are Hindus.
Absolutely. So that is good. I'm so happy that you got the crux of the not only the teaching which attracted you, but you met distinguished people like Ananda Mahima and Ramana Maharshi and Nim Karoli Baba. So that was a lovely, it is a personal, when you see a role model, when you see somebody living this vision, then it has a different impact. Absolutely. Shaunaka, now, what impacted you the most? What about?
I think a couple of things really struck me. One is what Rameshwar said about the pluralism of Hinduism, its ability to, the idea of Vada, in the ancient times, where people from different traditions would get together and talk about what is truth. And all share their vision and have respect for that. And so it wasn't sectarian, it wasn't dogmatic or doctrinaire. So that was very attractive. And I think that was caught up with the concept of Atma and the idea of Brahman, the idea that we are not this material self. This is just, it's a part of us, but it's very temporary. It's not eternal. And we are the eternal aspect. And in that sense, we should not fear death, because death is only of the body, not of us, etc. And that just expanded my capacity. But it did it in another way. In the Gita, in the 5th chapter, there's the concept of Darshana, and it's the equal vision coming from that idea that we are all transcendent beings. We're not bound by identities of race or gender or caste or culture or religion. And so that was very liberating. So this kind of philosophy that underpinned the pluralism, but then to see all living beings, and there's an equity. I can't say equality, because snakes and elephants are just different. You can play with an elephant, you don't play with snakes. But there's the fact that we have to respect the sacredness of life, that kind of was more than just expansive. That was transforming, because then I was brought up in what was very much a meaty culture, shall we say, and all of a sudden I was challenged that these cows, these chickens, these pigs, these are all also eternal living beings, just in different bodies, and I have to respect them. I have to see them with that Darshana, that vision of equality and equity, and treat them with that kind of respect and the sacredness of the energy of life, this transcendent energy. But that also led me to, well, I suppose we'll get into talking about what it led me to. We'll talk about it later. But and then I think that was kind of a springboard. As I said, I came from a Christian background. I was very concerned about happiness. I wanted to be happy. I was very concerned about that, funnily enough. And the vehicle was love. And that kind of made sense. And that was part of the Christian message, but it seemed to be replicated everywhere, in every film I saw and everything I read, and etc. So everyone was talking. So what is this love? And the idea of the Atma and the idea of a transcendent love that's not based on the bodily relation or these things, that really took my mind, because I heard in the Christian message, I heard Jesus talking about that, a love of brother that wasn't gender specific. It was a transcendent love. He wasn't being specific like that. And I got the hint of this. How do you practice this? And based on what you said at the beginning, you're following of the teachings of Dayananda Saraswati, which you're following in a very pucka way. You're in disciplic succession very wonderfully. But of course, I'm in a different disciplic succession. So, the teachings of Ramanuja, of Madhva, of Vallabhacharya, of Chaitanya, of Baladev Vijayabhushan, and their idea that, yes, Brahman, but yes, also the possibility to have a relationship with God. and that being a relationship of love. So funnily enough, we're talking about the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, the speaker, the Bhagavan aspect, became my Ishtadev, became the Lord of my heart, the one to whom I was just, how could you not be attracted? You know, that kind of thing. And also Krishna was, there was nothing, I'd never come across anyone like Krishna. You know, all the other manifestations of God in every other tradition, in most traditions, they don't talk about God. In Hindu traditions, we talk a lot about God. But all the other manifestations were very dharmic. God was doing the right thing all the time. And Krishna is a rascal. He tells lies, he steals butter, he's, and I just thought,
makes love with all the gopis at once.
Makes love with all the gopis. But the fact is, he gets away with it, and none of the rest of us do, because he's God. And rather than being envious, how to love that, and that was a spiritual challenge for me. I realized why I'm separate from God, because I don't get God. I want God to conform to my image of God, and Krishna doesn't conform. And then I was so interested to find out, I mean, it was years later really, that Krishna was the most popular deity in India. So the Indians obviously have a rebellious kind of a streak. They're attracted to this kind of reality. They're considered very conservative, but kind of not really. So anyway, so that there's just some things that made a huge impression on me and transformed my way of thinking.
Great. I think just to, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking what impacted me the most. And I think what impacted me the most is that at least in the Vedic tradition, the way I have studied, Ishvara, the God, what we call, is not presented as a person away from us, but as the reality which pervades everything. And I think that order that is there in the universe, knowledge and power, in fact, anything you look in the universe can be just broken down to just ultimately just knowledge and power, which manifests as all these different forms. And I think what I loved is that, generally I grew up with seeing problems in the world and I wanted to fix the world and all. And I actually discovered that the entire universe is pervaded by divinity. So I don't need to fix anything. All I have to do is to just be a contributor and flow with life and understand the unity of things. And I think that took away a lot of pressure from me and a lot of dissatisfaction, cynicism, this kind of attitude that I know how the world has to be and it has to conform to what I think is right. So I think these kind of childish ideas I was able to give up, which was highly liberating for me, So then I move to the next question. And the next question is, if you think, as Rameshwar was very much highlighting the fact that this is a darshana. So it's not only about ideas, but it is also about our personal transformation. What kind of change we go through as human beings? How do we mature? How our maturing translates into our action? So if you were to think about your personal, how have you changed as a result of your journey and your exposure? Which are the areas where you find so-called transformation in you? So can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Rameshwar. I think on a personal level, maybe the most transformative thing. I think the transformation is happening all the time. Yeah. So it's what can I discern kind of more intellectually and put it in time and space a bit. But one thing is, I found in Indian scripture and various scriptures, I found certain principles that helped me understand reality as you have just described, and also principles by which I could lead my life. So it was about the development of character, of integrity, and also of spirituality. And I found it interesting that a number of the principles were both kind kind of material and spiritual, both dharmic and transcendent, that you use the same principle and you can stop at any point along the train track you wanted to. But so some of those principles became, they certainly defined how I've lived since and how I've identified myself to myself since. And by having principles like that, I suppose you look at a text like the Mahabharata, and it's all about Dharma, and it has these principles in it, and the issue of Dharma is principles, and that was a revelation to me, because religion in a Western context is about well, we often think it's about, I think it's about more than this, but for the popular audience, it's about rules and regulations. And I think in the Indian context, and specifically in the Hindu context, it's more about principles, and the application of principles is situational. How you apply Dharma, and hence Yudhishthir in the Mahabharata says that Dharma is shukshma, Dharma is subtle. So it's very much dependent on the character of the individual. So developing character became a challenge. That was something that challenge was given to me, not by Hinduism, but by my father, who was an Irish Catholic. but he was the person who emphasized to me character and principles. But interestingly, one of the examples of a person of character and principles he gave me was Mahatma Gandhi. So, and my father, I don't know where he got this from. I think I've heard it elsewhere as well. But he said, Gandhi was a politician among saints and a saint among politicians. And it was kind of, he was a person of principle, but, we know him as a politician rather than a saint. But because he was so principled, even as a politician, we considered him somewhat saintly. And among saints, he was a politician. So I understand that. But you don't meet politicians with principles, I think was his point. So he was trying to exhort me to have principles, and meeting that in a Hindu context, but not only that, but also meeting principles that were very discernible, very attractive, and maybe somewhat difficult to practice, but then just the practice of practicing, shall we say, transforms one. So, for instance, ahimsa, many ways we can look at ahimsa and practice ahimsa. One is to be a vegetarian, obviously, and we can be different types of vegetarian. I have a friend who considers himself a non-practicing vegetarian, but so we can.
What does that mean? Non-practicing vegetarian?
A meat-eating vegetarian.
A meat-eating vegetarian, but there are a lot of meat-eating vegetarians or Hindus in India, but they don't resent the principle. They just don't practice it. But to practice the principle, I found transformed me as a person. I became much more compassionate and much more tolerant. You develop virtue, and I've discerned that over the decades. You see it happening, and now if there's an ant in front of me, I'll change my course. Why should I change my course for an ant? Well, why not? The ant is a citizen of the state in this philosophical understanding. So then I should act like that. So then I begin to act like that, and then it just becomes a habit. So, if there's a fly in the house, you open the window and let him out. Why keep him trapped? You begin to think differently. And then obviously in other relationships. So if you're at a friend's house and they serve you a meal and it's really badly cooked, and they ask, how was that? Your response is, wonderful. And you're doing it because it's ahimsa. It's you don't want to cause offense, or you don't want to be cruel or hurtful. And if your wife says, does my bum look big in this? You say, no, because again, that's how, so you become a different person. And that's very discernible. It's nearly a scientific experiment. You have a thesis, you have a hypothesis, you have a process of practice, and then you see a result. It's simple as that. So that was very much inspired by reading of Indian texts.
Yeah, That is really nice, Shaunaka, because I love this. Dharma is sukshma. So it requires that subtlety to interpret in the right way. It's not just about following rules, and it's about becoming the person who, all the sensitivities, developing them. And then what happens is that you actually see it in you. And that is just a beautiful thing. It doesn't just remain an idea. Love that. Okay.
I want to echo something of what Shonika
Yes.
said about practice, which was, I think, one of the primary things that attracted me to Indian philosophy is that it is so completely practical, both on the individual level of learning yoga and meditation and an outlook that will help you get through the difficulties of life and the suffering that we all encounter, and then that wider view of being in the universe in a state of love, which is what Shonika. I come from a Jewish background, although my family were not practicing particularly. And I get to Neem Karoli Baba in India, and he was talking to us about Christ. So there's this old Hindu man who's a devotee of Hanuman, and says Hanuman and Christ were the same, And someone asked him about how to meditate, and he said, meditate the way Christ meditated. And we asked him how that was, and he said, he lost himself in love. And that, approach that I realized, and in talking with Ramdas particularly, his evolution from being a Harvard professor to being a bhakta practicing devotion was a pretty thorough transformation, and that was became the path that I have been pulled into also, and that it becomes clear that love is that emotion, of the emotional component of merging into oneness. And as we deal on a planetary scale with the climate disaster, for instance, or this pandemic, our relationship with nature and the world around us, to make that work, we have to understand our interrelationship.
Absolutely.
And that interrelationship is based on love and the responsibility, if you want to put it in those terms, that we share for the blue marble that we live on together. So I think on that level, and the practice of working on oneself, through whatever path that you may tread, whether it's the philosophical or the devotional or the service side. And, I'm sure each of us incorporate parts of all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think that there's that wonderful old, there's a concert hall in New York called Carnegie Hall.
Yes.
That I'm sure you know, Nima. And that's the pinnacle of great performances for concert musicians. And so the joke is that someone asks a great concert violinist after a concert, how did you get to Carnegie Hall? And he says, practice, practice, practice. And this is what, whatever our particular path may be. That is, I think, the part of the evolution that is bringing us along toward that state of unity or oneness or sabek, however it translates for any of us. And it is what is needed in the world also.
Absolutely.
So I want to just, honor the practices that have come from the Indian philosophy, the real work that comes out of that.
My answer is a little bit more, you guys are very big looking at big things, just about my personal transformation. So when I look at myself, when I first met my teacher, I think I was mixture of so many different things. On one hand, I had this slight arrogance, thinking that I was smart and all of that. On the other hand, I had insecurity, I had fears, I had all kinds of things all going on simultaneously within me. And I was so oblivious to all of that. And I was just kind of, going out and showing a face, which was, what sounds good or what looks good. But I was really not in touch with myself at all.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that these studies made me a much more reflective human being. And there were many surprises because I began to see my own vulnerabilities, my own, pressures that insecurities. And that was initially very shocking because one tends to kind of hide behind the vision that I'm perfect and the world needs fixing, right? So I think when I actually started looking into my own vulnerabilities, that actually was a very, very revealing thing for me. And as I started actually dealing with my issues, whatever they were, being honest and dealing with them, as you said, through practice, Rameshwar, practicing. And, it's not about ideas, but it's about implementing certain attitudes, certain values in your life, certain orientations with which you live. And as I began to do that, ironically, or it is of course related, that even my relationship with others changed because I became less and less judgmental about others and others' shortcomings, but more and more accommodating, more and more compassionate, as Shaunaka says, because you understand and you honor human vulnerabilities. And at the same time, you have to try and you have to live by principles, as Shaunaka is saying, and you have to walk that path and see that transformation and pull everybody else along with you, those who come in contact with you. So I think that was a huge thing, that many pressures as an individual, they just started dropping and I was becoming much more authentic, much more sensitive and aware human being. So and as the Shaunaka says, it's very tangible, right? Externally, nothing much has changed about me, but how I feel and how I think, that there is an inner revolution, and that is beautiful to see that whole process, right? And it's an ongoing process, as Shaunaka says. It's not that you can say, "Oh, now it's over and I've gotten there," right? But it's a very rewarding thing. That journey is beautiful. Yeah.
I think we see it in the situations that we are confronted with in our lives, that relate to the difficult things that we deal with.
Exactly. How do you deal with those challenges?
With, what the Buddha says about birth, old age, disease, and death.
Yes.
These are realities that
you need to
confront us.
Come to terms with, absolutely.
And that's, as they say in the States, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true. I want to move a little bit to the topic of our talk, and that is about a little bit Western. I just wanted a little bit of discussion on, Indian philosophy and Western perspectives. So one thing that I noticed, when I was teaching Gita or studying Gita, that people's relationship with Gita is threefold. One is it can be studied as philosophy in a university like, Oxford or wherever, and it is just an amazing philosophical study. And at the same time, Gita can be a spiritual pursuit. And some people can say that, hey, I'm listening to Gita, not as a philosophical pursuit, but I want to evolve and I want to, know this final reality, which is what we call a spiritual pursuit. And the third aspect, which also I noticed, and that so many people, as Shaunaka was talking about, for them, it is just merely Gita is words of Lord Krishna, and they have a totally religious take on it, and they love Krishna, and Krishna is the Ishta Devata, and it's a religious expression and devotion. So that is something which kind of fascinated me. One book and three different angles to it. One is philosophical, which is just purely kind of understanding the bigger picture. The other is spiritual, which is concerned with your evolution and so-called understanding the final reality and being awakened, as Shaunaka was talking about. And third is purely religious. So they all come together and they seem to merge. And I just wanted to know, with reference to Western philosophy, are they more compartmentalized, or there is merging, or what is the relationship? I'm curious to know.
You want first crack on Shaunaka?
I'll give it a go. Thank you very much for the poison chalice. I think, you mentioned these three things: the Ishvara, the spiritual, the philosophical. But I think in the Indian context, and this is a big difference with the Western way of understanding, in the Indian context, these three things are found in the same person.
Excellent. I'm so happy you said that. Yes.
Yeah, and so in a university like Oxford or Harvard or anywhere in the world, at JNU, you'll have a philosophy department, and you'll have a religion department, and you'll have and they're all separated. And I think Indian holistic thinking, which comes from Vedic thinking, the concept of Rita in the Vedas, the concept of cosmic order. So it's this assumption that there is cosmic order. So therefore, everything is connected. So when you want to understand something in an Indian context, unconsciously, people don't know what the word Rita is. It's just received wisdom. But there's the assumption that you look at things holistically. You look at the whole thing. Now, the Western philosophical assumption, the way of looking at things, their darshan, their way of seeing. So, and darshan is the Indian word for philosophy. So how they see the world is more according to Aristotle and Greek philosophy, where you actually take things into the component parts, and to understand it, you look at a component rather than the whole. Now, it's not exclusively like that, and it's not exclusively like that in Indian philosophy. I'm being simplistic. But there is a very different way of looking at the world. Your starting point is different, and this idea of the starting point becomes very profound. So if we look at Rita, that we're all interconnected, that means I'm a small part of the greater whole. So therefore, the idea of seva becomes automatic. So how do I find my place? And then the idea of doing the right thing for the greater whole, dharma, becomes automatic. So these ideas trickle down from something that's philosophical. So religion and spirituality have a philosophical basis. They're not divorced from each other as they are in the Western context. So, and the West historically developed differently. Philosophy and religion developed separately. So a lot of the religions of the West, well, of the Middle East really, they don't have a philosophical basis. So they looked for one in mainly Greek philosophy. In a global context, which we say exists, but I don't think really exists, unless you're talking about economics and politics, but not spiritually or intellectually. In a global context, why wouldn't Christianity work with Vedanta philosophy, for instance, or Sankhya, or etc., or Judaism or Islam? And it's to have that breadth, that capacity to understand like that. So that capacity is there when you have this holistic vision, and when you see yourself as a servant of the greater whole. Whereas in the West, because of the Abrahamic underpinning, as well as Greek philosophy, the Abrahamic underpinning says that God created the world and then gave it to man and said, you are the master. So your starting point isn't necessarily that you're the servant, it's that you're the master. Now, this is a very different way of seeing the world. So therefore, we will conquer disease. We will conquer death. We will control animals and the weather and all these things. And we've failed in all these things. And we will never succeed in all these things. It's because the assumption is a bit ridiculous. So again, you look at this philosophical assumption, how you start your life is completely different. And this idea of Rita and of Seva and etc. went from India into China through Buddhism, into Japan, through Vaishnavism into Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand and all up to Bali and Fiji. So it influences all of the East in its thinking. And it's interesting that that way of thinking isn't valued. It's not valued in global discourse. And that's a problem. And that's something that India and the East should start to do something about. There are only two places, two academic programs in the world on Indian philosophy in the University of Hawaii, and we've just started in Oxford. And in Oxford, it's the first time in 900 years that we've taught Indian philosophy. So it's not taken seriously. And if it's not taken seriously by people in India, why should anyone else take it seriously?
Exactly.
Now I'm not an Indian, but I'm also not this body, so I'm also not Irish. so I can say that. I'm not saying it in a critical way. I'm saying it in a way to try and inspire people to understand what the issue is. The issue is if India doesn't take itself seriously, why should anyone else take itself seriously? Now, we do take ourselves seriously in an Indian context in terms of nuclear power and economic progress and all this stuff, but none of these are Indian things. None of these are India's contribution to the world. And like Rameshwar said, on every street corner there's someone doing yoga, making a book, and India is getting none of the profits. So
I don't know about that. They're getting a lot of the profits.
Well, not as much as others are. Mindfulness. Everyone is doing mindfulness now, and we say it's from Buddhist sources, but of course it's from Indian sources, Buddhist, Jain, Hindu, everything, the same principles. And again, it's been synthesized into something that sucked all the culture, all the philosophy out of it, I think even mindfulness has so much more to offer spiritually and philosophically that needs to be investigated. Mantra meditation, kirtan, bhajan, has brought so much peace to so many people and has never been investigated. Who's doing the neurological studies? Well, India should take hold of that one before that goes as well.
Yeah.
So India is offering so much unconsciously already. And I suppose the pizza effect thing is when I go to Chennai or Delhi or Mumbai and I see Indians walking around in yoga clothes and yoga mats that are all Western.
Eating pizza.
Yeah, and eat pizza as well. And it's kind of, they're buying this stuff for mega bucks, mega rupees, whereas, you just go and buy a yoga pants and a kurta. It costs nothing, and you get a straw mat, done, boss. So I do think the philosophical vision leads to very practical consequences, as we've discussed, even economic. But you have to understand what the vision is, and India has to invest in philosophical education in India, because in an audit we did of Indian philosophy departments around India some years ago, we found out that 80% of the philosophy being taught was Western.
That's right.
Very little Indian philosophy being taught in India, and that shows Indian students that it's not worthy, it's not worth it. Whereas people in the West are actually practicing it all over the place, and they're doing yoga. They have no idea what they're doing because no one's explaining it to them. This is really difficult. This is impractical, and India's losing out a lot, and it's doing all kinds of things to promote Indianness, but it's kind of missing the essential points. I feel the Indianness that is tried to, it's the soft power is trying to promote, is not essential. It's not what they need to promote to really have influence on the planet. When every world leader is doing yoga and mindfulness and kirtan, then you're starting to have an influence, and they're doing it now, but they're doing it just for bodily and a little bit of mental stability, but not mental control of the self, and not for higher purposes, not more engaging purposes, and not to help them be better Christians, better Muslims, better Jews, better Buddhists, better Hindus, whatever the sectarian thing, we don't care. These are principles for everyone, everywhere, at any time. And if they're of no religion, doesn't matter. This will help you. As Rameshwar says, the practice is the important thing. It will transform you. And don't worry about these other considerations. Anyway, they're just... So sorry you asked me first.
No, that was really amazing, Shaunaka. One thing that really stands out, which, from your standpoint, Indians, we ourselves don't take ourselves so seriously. I mean, the treasure that we have in terms of the vision and the all-encompassing vision, which doesn't leave anything out. And I think the whole world has so much to gain from that, right? But unfortunately, and this is what I'm trying to do, to make Indians recognize, these thoughts are profound and how potent they are in every different areas of our life. So thank you. It is just so nice for me to hear that.
I think that this, I agree with much of what you said, Shaunaka. And I think the contribution from the Western side of bringing the East and Western traditions together may be something about how we see identity on a very personal, individual, psychological and spiritual level of who we feel that we are. And Ramdas in his last years, one of the things that he said often to people was, you are not who you think you are. You're not your thoughts. And that process of finding your real being inside, and what I think the Indian tradition describes as Hridayam, that spiritual heart, of coming into that place. And the mindfulness practice is really to see your thoughts as passing thoughts, and along with emotions and sensations, and that is the work. I traveled to India with two friends in 1970. One of them is a guy named Danny Goleman, who wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, which has had a great influence on the way we educate people in the West about who we are. And it brings people into that sense of, there's not just intellectual intelligence, there's also that feeling intelligence, that intuitive understanding and emotional being that we all are also. And the other guy is now named Krishna Das, and he does kirtan. And he's kind of become the, I think somebody called him the chant master of the yoga circuit in the West. But he has, he was given that work by Neem Karoli Baba. And the other side of this that I think, as you work on yourself, that integration of devotion and that understanding of identity, and some of that is about not taking ourselves too seriously, because we tend to identify with our manas mind, the discursive thought mind of who we think we are, or think we know what it's about. And I think my own philosophical stance these days is I don't know, on that very, individual level anyway. But I think that leads you into doing service, and service for others on almost the level of the the bodhisattva vow from the Buddhists that says, I won't take enlightenment until everybody gets done, until we can help everyone get through. And those urges that come out of doing, practice of trying to help, and of being a broader sense of being.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not just, when I get caught in my mind, I get very righteous about how I think things should be and how other people should be too, which is mostly not a very useful approach.
Yeah.
And you need to, kind of, I find I have to let go of those ideas constantly. And that I think those practices, the devotion and service and the work on yourself to find your identity, not just as an intellectual, but as an emotional and physical being in the world. And this is the mystery of our existence.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is not going to continue, and that nobody gets out of here alive. Those are very clear parameters that we have to deal with.
Great, yeah.
And that, I think I've been through some pretty intense things. My daughter was killed in a traffic accident when she was 14. And that I was confronted with that, just complete disaster, and my love for her has not stopped. And I understand more about how love continues, and it is the greatest power in the universe, and it holds everything together. I like to think of love as like the dark energy of the universe.
And the light simultaneously.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, to practice those things, I don't know if it's not, it's the integration. That is back to the oneness that Krishna shows when he shows Arjuna the universe. In that chapter 11, I think, right?
Yeah. And chapter 12, he expresses over and over about priti priyosti me.
Yeah.
That it's because of my love for you, my affection for you. Nima, you have your hand kind of
because I'm looking at the time and we have only 5 minutes. And
we better take questions.
So, and I'm looking at the number of questions that are there, and that is just like.
I have a question in front of me that is from Linda Seelman. If I say what the question is, we could just take that.
Okay, great.
She says, I'm struggling with aligning what is being said here about unity and self-awareness with what appears from the outside to be the fragmenting of India through intergroup hostility. Any insight to help me understand this? And I'm sure everyone has an opinion about this, but I can give an opinion. But if we go to the Bhagavad Gita, which is the subject on the table, exactly the same thing was happening, Linda. There was a struggle. There were greedy people, envious people, power-hungry people, angry people, and they were looking for more than they deserved, more than they were due, and they weren't allowing other people to have access to what they deserved and what they were due. That was Duryodhan and the Kauravas, and then the Pandavas with Yudhisthira. So that's what precipitated the struggle. And I think what the Bhagavad Gita says, we think, well, why didn't Krishna, it's the song of God, why didn't Krishna just come and say, let there be peace, and then everyone would become peaceful? because everyone has choice, and that choice is sacrosanct. And in the end of the Gita, after giving his teachings, Krishna says to Arjuna, frustratingly for some people, now I have said what I said, deliberate on this fully, then do what you wish to do. Icha, he says, do as you desire to do, which means it's not dogmatic, which means Krishna is leaving him choice, which means that Arjuna can choose to love, because without choice, you can't love. And so this is a philosophical basis for love. And Krishna continues to give us that. And we continue to make very strange choices. And we choose sectarianism, we choose casteism, we choose to discriminate on people's gender. I was just saying intergroup hostility is actually interpersonal hostility. And we choose nationalism. Now, from an Indian point of view, nationalism is a very strange choice. It's a philosophical idea that arose in the 17th century in Europe, mainly Germany, and spread throughout the world. And now we have Indian nationalism. There's nothing Indian about it, unfortunately. And it causes difficulty because now we're Indian and not Pakistani, and we're not Indian and not, and India, we're even kind of Indians from Himachal Pradesh, and we're not from Chennai. And it gets very weird. So the fact is that these sectarianism, these barriers of identity, of misidentity, shall we say, not identifying with the self, they've always been with us. And on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, they were with us. Krishna had actually in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita is a chapter of the Mahabharata. Krishna had gone to the protagonists and asked them all, please do not fight. And they all chose to fight. So that's why he didn't interfere with the fact that there was a battle. But he wanted Arjuna to be the instrument. And he said, these people have come here to fight and to die. This is their choice. We can't take away their choice, foolish as it may look, but it's their fervent desire. So someone's fervent desire is to kill someone because they're a Muslim or a Hindu or a Jew or a Christian or whatever. That's very sad. And that's the result of a lack of education and a lack of instruction and a lack of perspective and darshan. But we can't take away the person's choice to be foolish.
As we work on this from our own standpoint, though, from our own point of view, from within, to see how we can affect those differences and fears and anger that arise in different people. I think that when you go inside and you understand that your being is the same as another person's being, that consciousness is not individual. I mean, we experience it as who we think we are, but that ego consciousness is just one fragment of the mirror of the greater consciousness. And when we understand that we're the same as other people, and we try, it's not try, if you don't see differences, then you see that unity. And that I think is communicated from one being to another.
I agree. In the traditional Indian philosophical response, I would say I agree with everything of what you said, and what you meant to say was. No, but I do agree with what
this is known as philosophical combat, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's just a miasma. But I agree with what you say, that the basis of consciousness. But from the Vaishnava perspective and even Shaivite perspective, I would say that there is that. It's exactly that oneness of consciousness, and also simultaneously, inconceivably, individuality.
Yeah.
So we do have to make choices. And those choices will lead us to an individual relationship with God of love, of other people with love, but it's based on this shared consciousness. We are little parts of this oneness. There's no doubt about that. But the individuality is important. It's important for Linda as well to understand that she has to make choices. in spite of the fact that other people mightn't be making good choices. And to understand that we're all in the same boat and we've all made strange choices, and therefore we should have compassion for these other people who are making strange choices, because there, but for the grace of God, go I, etc. But I see that it's we have 5 minutes to go, and
I just wanted to make one comment. And as a teacher, a lot of people ask me this question, that how come on one hand, Lord Krishna is talking about oneness and consciousness is one, and we are all universal being. And on the other hand, asking Arjuna to fight, right? So it seems contradictory. It is not contradictory. Exactly because what Shaunaka is talking about, you can't deny that there are individuals and who have free will, and if they are not, if they are just caught by their own greed and their own self-interest, they are going to make inappropriate choices. And then, somebody has to counter that. It's not just going to be taken care of. So this is why the world, as we live in individuals, as long as people make those choices which are, coming from a narrow perspective of things, the world is not going to change. And we need to make conscious effort to kind of correct it also. But all that happens within one non-dual self. So there is no contradiction as such, because there is one consciousness and at the same time individuality with free will, as you very rightly pointed out, Shaunaka. Absolutely.
so
So
Nima,
that is-
Non-dual beings living in duality.
Yes. And now
Yes.
Asad is here. So our time is up, because Asad had said that once I pop up, then we all stop.
No, I actually thank you to all of you all for such an insightful session. I think it was our bad. We should have just done a half-day seminar. When you have such great speakers, we've had the pleasure of hosting Shaunaka several times in the past at SR House. But honestly, it's been an enlightening session, at least for me, and judging by that, the multitude of questions we've had. And I feel so bad that we've not managed to address them, but maybe we'll have a round 2 or a 2.0 in the near future. Firstly, congratulations to Nima, Nandini, and Saloni on your book, and wish you all the success. And thank you, Saloni, for bringing us this project. And also to a longtime friend of Avid's and New York Times journalist Perry Garfinkel, who introduced us to Rameshwar Das and his work,
Yes, he did.
his team. And so thank you to him.
Thanks, Perry.
And our partners, the Bangalore Literature Festival, Shiny, Sri Krishna, Vikram. We at Avid, we really believe in collaborations and partnerships, and we love doing this with like-minded people, like-minded souls. It makes the journey so much more interesting and so much more real, for lack of better words. And to you, our audiences, we've had such an overwhelming response to this. I said we were almost breaking our record numbers, with the number of questions, we can see that was really, really meaningful to all of you all. I generally jot down notes during these sessions. I have so many keywords, buzzwords. I won't even go down that path right now, and the think that I might embarrass myself. But thank you very much. And Nima, thank you so much for steering this conversation. I have friends who are devotees of Nima, and they try to get me to come to a couple of workshops. And I said, I will when we go back to the old normal. At Avid, we believe that learning never stops, and we have many, many more interesting programs lined up. Just stalk us on social media. That's the best way to find out more, or visit our website. Our next session is next week, actually, on Thursday. It's on the rise of the conscious consumerism. It's kind of maybe it's a step 2 from this conversation, how people are changing given the times that we live in, which is making us more real, and we rethink of what we have and what we actually need. And many more interesting conversations to follow about museums of the future with technology. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Thank you for all the insightful conversation. And remember that learning never stops. Stay safe and good night.
Thank you, Shaudaka. Thank you, Rameshwaram. Thank you, Asad, for inviting us.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.